Imagine a world where a person's stress level was indicative of whether or not they could be a criminal. A world where violent thought is enough to get you gunned down by the police. That describes the dystopian future of Psycho-Pass. It's a good thing that it's fiction and not reality, because I gotta tell you, the hue of anybody on I-93 North going into Boston on a weekday morning would be pitch black. Psycho-Pass is the brainchild of Gen Udobuchi. Udobuchi is known for series like Madoka Magica, Fate Zero, and Chaos Dragon. A running theme in his work is the grim view of the worlds that he creates. He's also known for murdering half the cast in any one of his shows, so much so that he's called the Euro Butcher. I gotta tell you, you really know you've made it as a writer when you got a bingo game associated with your work. In Psycho-Pass, this comes in the form of a trigger-happy police force that'll take you in if your thoughts pose a threat to society. And it seems today that you can't turn on the TV without hearing some story about the police and their use of force. Smarter people than I have spoken on this subject, and for a channel that focuses primarily on comedy, I don't feel like this is the right forum with which to discuss it. I mention it now mainly because the parallels are apparent and, frankly, unavoidable. The world of Psycho-Pass is one in which the citizenry have their brains scanned. These scans reveal a number called a crime coefficient. If that number is over a certain threshold, steps are taken against the person. This can be as minor as therapy, but can get as extreme as visceral execution. Psycho-Pass's original run was in 2012, and I didn't decide to discuss it today because of its parallels with our society. Instead, I happened to buy the video game Mandatory Happiness for the PlayStation Vita, and I hadn't watched the show at the time. So I watched the show, and I ended up wanting to talk about it, so you'll have to forgive me for my reasoning not exactly being intellectual. Now, one thing about me that might surprise some of you is I have immense difficulty finishing things. I can't fully explain why, but there are numerous shows and video games that I've put hours and hours into and just haven't finished because of the dumbest reasons on the planet, and I imagined something similar would happen with Psycho-Pass because I'd been told that Season 2 was far inferior to Season 1. But I managed to buckle down and I watched all of it, much to my surprise. And I really like it. I think it's great. At least, I think the first season is great. The characters are really fleshed out, they all have interesting interactions with each other, and there isn't a character that feels like they don't belong. The show builds to its overarching story nicely, and it's all very well paced. The reveals, the twists, they're perfectly placed, and they keep the viewer entertained and invested. There's so much to like in the first season of Psycho-Pass. For example, I really like the villain. I think his motivations were understandable but still kept him antagonistic, and he was a perfect foil to the world and the main characters as they'd been set up. There's so much to like. It just makes Season 2 shortcomings all the more pronounced and unfortunate. Season 2 seemed to be something that nobody really wanted to make, or even be a part of. After the events of Season 1, there are some new characters that get brought into the mix, and they're just not as interesting as the characters in Season 1. Time has passed between these characters, but it doesn't feel like any of them have any reason to be together. In Season 1, it was clear that the division of characters had time together before we met up with them. Their interactions were representative of that. In Season 2, the new characters don't really matter outside of their moment-to-moment dealings with Tsunemori, who's the main character, outside of one very major exception. There's even a character that's part of the main cast, but he's there because he happens to be an expert on a MacGuffin that comes into play later in the story. Outside of it, he adds nothing. It's a wonder he wasn't just some one-off side character that only showed up in the episode where he was the most important. But it's not just the new Randys that are underdeveloped, even the show's returning cast have less to do. This is especially disappointing for characters like Ginoza. After everything that happened to him in Season 1, he should be one of the most compelling characters in Season 2. But he takes a back seat, and even when he's there, he's more just a voice of reason character in the exact same way that he was in Season 1. Even the new villain is less interesting as more reveals about him are made. I do give the writers credit. I understand the difficulty of creating a villain that wouldn't be immediately dispatched in this world, and wasn't the exact same thing as Makishima, but Kirito Kamui was just not a good enough attempt. I think I made an audible ugh when they made the reveal about why Kamui isn't detectable to the brain scanners. I feel like they realized this partway through, the writers did, and there was a second villain added to compensate, but it only ended up complicating matters more, and it all ended rather flatly. I just want to give a blanket recommendation to Psycho Pass because Season 1 is legitimately great. It's smart, it has good characters, it's a fun detective show. But Season 2, while it has its moments, is a major inferiority that may be hard for some people to stomach. It feels like it was just a waste of time. Looking at the cover of Mandatory Happiness, that seems to be the case. Hinakawa, Togane, and Shimotsuki aren't anywhere on the box. Kogami is also featured prominently, so it's either a retelling of Season 1 or set in a world where Season 2 never happened. And if that's the case, I gotta tell you, I'd kinda be fine with that.